right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the 2022 Symposium on Substance Use Research. As you have no doubt heard across the events, if you've participated, this symposium is a collaboration of 5 centers across 3 states, and I want to recognize them now. They include the COBRA on Opioids and Overdose in Rhode Island, the West Virginia Clinical and Translational Science Institute, the West Virginia IDEA Network and Biomedical Research Excellence, the Rural Drug Addiction Research COBRA in Nebraska, and the Center for Addiction and Disease Risk Exacerbation at Brown University in Rhode Island. My name is Rick Bevins. I have the great privilege of serving as director of the Rural Drug Addiction Research Center at the University of Nebraska. We are so excited that you have joined us for this panel on promotion and tenure. Just a few quick housekeeping things is that the event is being recorded. We will send emails to registrants and post on social media when the recordings are available. This session is a webinar, so attendees are muted, but please use the Q&A function to send any questions and we will work to answer those throughout the session. Today, we're going to discuss strategies and consideration for promotion and tenure across a range of disciplines and appointments. We have 4 faculty members joining us. And what I'm going to ask them to do is to each introduce themselves one at a time and provide a little bit of their background, little research area, and their promotion and or tenure type of experience. So Dr. Gwendon, if you could lead us off, that would be amazing.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Josie Gwendon. I'm tenure associate professor in the Department of Pharmacology and Neuroscience, and I'm French Canadian, so I moved in the state like 15 years ago, and I'm from Canada, so I'm from Montreal, Canada. I speak French, and basically my experience for tenure, I do background research is about cannabinoids, so in inflammatory pain, neuropathic pain, and recently cancer pain, so anything cannabinoid related, addiction, tolerance, and mostly pain. And basically my experience for tenure and promotion, it was stressful a little bit, but because there's a lot of components that you're not thinking about when you just start, and also but it went smoothly because I got tenured, but it was a little stressful, so I wish I had some background information and a panel like that to attend before doing it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Dr. Henderson.
Hi, I'm Brandon Henderson. So I'm at Marshall University in the Department of Biomedical Sciences, and I'm an associate professor, recently tenured. So as far as my research background, I'm a lifelong, so since I was a graduate student, I've been studying nicotine addiction in different forms. So right now, I use a lot of patch clamp electrophysiology, drug self-administration to study how neural circuits are impacted by nicotine and anything that's used with nicotine. So I mentioned I'm recently promoted with tenure. So if anyone says that going through the process is not stressful, they're lying. It's stressful. And so since going through that recently, I feel like my perspective is basically, how do you handle the workload? How do you handle the deadlines? And then getting everything in and, even like corralling your, people that are writing support letters. So I recently went through the process, and that's my experience, at least on this panel.
Thank you for that. Dr. Mahoney.
Yes, I'm James Mahoney. I'm an associate professor and clinical neuropsychologist out here at West Virginia University and the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute. So yes, I've been out here in West Virginia for about 6 years now, right out of my clinical neuropsych fellowship. Started off as an assistant professor, was promoted about 1.5 years ago to associate professor. Research interests and focus is more on different forms of neuromodulation for opioid use disorder and other co-occurring substance use disorders. So we have some clinical trials going on here looking at deep brain stimulation, focused ultrasound, low intensity focused ultrasound, and then transcranial magnetic stimulation. So those are my focuses. And as I mentioned earlier, yeah, went through the promotion process about 2.5 years ago and was officially promoted from assistant to associate about 1.5 years ago.
Thank you so much. Dr. Wheeler.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Wheeler at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm an associate research professor in the Nebraska Center for Research on Children, Youth, Families, and Schools, and the co-director of the Nebraska Academy for Methodology, Analytics, and Psychometrics. A lot of words there. So I'm in a non-tenure track position. So went through promotion about 3 years ago. My position is within a program of excellence research center, so a little bit different in that way as well. My research area is family and human development and research methods and applied statistics. My research examines factors related to youth risk behavior and academic outcomes, with a particular focus on family and cultural contexts, particularly for minoritized populations. And so being in a non-tenure track position and going up for promotion was fairly rare. It had the guidelines for promotion. We did have them within our college, but there were few of us who had gone before me. So that created some stress, but I can talk more about that experience when we get to discussing. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And I should add, I'll try to keep my mouth mostly shut, but I do come here with experience in that I was the chair of our promotion and tenure committee at the department for 10 years, and I was chair of the department for 8 years. And I'm proud to say I had 100% success rate of promotion and tenure in that time. So I might add a little snippet here and there, but I'm going to keep my mouth mostly shut because I really want to hear all the experiences here, and I know you all do too. So I'm going to take the prerogative and ask the first question, but I'm going to challenge the audience. I'm seeing there's great people on there. I know some of you, and I know some of you have lots of questions. But I'm going to take the first question and then hopefully open it up to audience questions. And I've already admitted to the panel that I stole this question, so this is not original to me, but I loved it. And so the question is, if you could travel in time and leave your pre-tenure self or pre-promotion self a note, what would that note say? And I would like each person to take a turn, and we could do alphabetical again or some other order, however you would like to do it. So raise your hand if you want to go first. How about that? There we go. All right, we got it.
So I could start. So basically I would leave myself a note saying that talk to as many people that went to the tenure process at that university ahead of time and look at all the criteria before. So way before, so that you're ready. So that would be the note, to talk to as many people as possible, even like administrative people that gathered documents and things like that, and to the professor that have been to the process at that university. That's the question I will leave myself.
Good. No, thank you for that.
So I guess we can go alphabetical. So for me, I feel like I'm lucky because our institution has a very detailed description of the promotion and tenure guidelines. So it's basically, it's a really great guide, but for personally, I would go back in time and tell myself to start early, because in the process of me going up for promotion and tenure, so I have 2 young kids, they're twins, and basically my P&T time kind of like hit right when they basically like kind of like needed the most care. And so it was one of those things that doing like basically running the lab, putting together my documents, and then taking care of them, basically like it almost broke me to a point. And so it was one of those things where obviously you can't not take care of your kids. And if you stop maintaining your lab, that obviously is not going to help your tenure. And then, and so, but you still got to hit the deadlines for like the packets have to be in like at a certain time to be reviewed by your internal department, then forwarded to your P&T committee internally, and then to the university P&T committee. So there's a lot of deadlines. I would just told myself, start earlier, in like certain things like getting letters. Like a lot of the documents that are on you, like you have direct control over when this is done, when it's compiled, but you can't like, call someone and say, hey, I need a letter for my tenure and promotion, and it's really important, and also I need it by tomorrow. So that's one of those things I would have started early.
Thank you for that.
I could go ahead and follow that up. So I think, some of what I would say to myself, if I could go back, is to persistently and constantly set calendar reminders to kind of assess and reassess where you are in the process. Because, kind of, especially when the pandemic hit, and, I had a very high clinical load, as well as, these different research projects I was involved in. And when the pandemic hit, time was just going by, week after week, just trying to stay afloat. And next thing you know, that turned to months, and then several months. And, I think most of it is really just being able to kind of look back and reassess where you are with the process, making sure, as mentioned previously, is to just know what the requirements are. And it's not as easy as just kind of looking at the handbook, talking to as many people, as I know was already mentioned, that have been through the process, that can kind of guide you and really kind of give you the knowledge that they've gained over the course of, either other people that have gone through it or themselves. And yeah, just constantly checking in, and just, with yourself, really just checking in with yourself to make sure that you're making the progress that you need to.
Thank you for that.
Great feedback so far to all of yourselves. I thought of many of those things, but let me, from my different perspective as a non-tenure track, like now, as I think back, I was a go-getter from day one, just given the uncertainty of promotion in a non-tenure track position. So I think my note would be more about a little bit more work-life balance, that it's okay to maybe say no to all of those service commitments. And it's okay if, that you don't have to kill yourself in this process. Like, I know after I received promotion, I was like, wow, I am tired. And so I think, having a little bit more balance sets you up for even greater success, once you are promoted. And for those of you who are eligible for tenure, then you have maybe a little bit less downtime after that process. I felt like I needed to recover a lot. The other thing I would have encouraged myself to do in that is just, again, like everyone mentioned, start talking earlier about what does the non-tenure track promotion process look like. There were some things that weren't clear. And so as I started that process, there were some little hiccups that were a bit stressful. So just, that would have been helpful again, right? Thinking about work-life balance, some, reduction of stress during that process, being able to have a little bit more clarity as I was going through that would have been helpful. Great question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So yes, I was just, thank you for that very much, Devin. Put your Q&As in the questions in the Q&A box. I'm not seeing any yet. I know I'm gonna shame you all on Twitter later. There's no questions coming because I know many of you and your Twitter handles. So with that though, I have a couple follow-ups. I really was really thinking about your comments about ask lots of questions from lots of people. And it got me thinking about the mentoring and mentoring structure, and is there mentoring, or did you go seek it yourself? So I'd really like to hear sort of what your thoughts are on, you don't have to tell me that you had terrible mentoring or great mentoring, but what do you think about mentoring and what things should be as a part of a mentoring toolbox to help people? I'm just leaving it open. I'm not going to call on anybody. So, but please feel free to jump in. Lori, you unmuted. Go.
Yeah, so one thing that I found really helpful was to what I might call like have peer mentors. So there were, I think, 5 of us who started at the same time. Some tenure track, and then myself as a non-tenure track. And I felt like we kind of mentored each other, like that peer mentoring. We would check in with each other throughout the whole process. And I found it really useful to be able to bounce ideas off of others kind of going through the process. So, and of course I had what you might consider more traditional senior mentors and that I would talk to, but I really found like that connection with my peers who were going through the process really useful. It kept, like each of us had special talents, right? Like some of us were very detail oriented and timeline focused. So that kept, all of us kind of moving together regarding deadlines and being able to think through issues. We shared drafts of our promotion materials with each other. And I found that peer feedback to be really useful. So this was something, in talking with other colleagues, not a lot of people had, thought to kind of work together in that way. And I don't know, I found in addition to, being able to have beers with people and, talk about, what we were going through, having that stress release, I just found that to be a really useful mentorship. I saw it as mentorship. We each kind of mentored each other in our own strengths, and then we're able to talk with each other about related to our weaknesses. So
that's great advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So I'll say that one, mentoring, it's necessary, and like if you don't have any mentoring, it's gonna exponentially decrease your chances of getting promotion and tenure. So I know that like for me, like basically before, like as I was moving from California to West Virginia, some of the mentors I have, and one of the best things is they're just brutally honest. They would say things that would terrify me, like, okay, Brandon, you have 3 years to get R1. And I'm just kind of like, okay, how does that process work? Well, you got to publish some good papers, which means I got to get my lab set up as soon as possible and get productive. And then what that meant is that, I had to kind of commit to doing a lot of my experiments at the outset because I couldn't wait to like hire people or like wait for graduate students to come and then train them. So I just started, as soon as I started getting equipment, I just started doing experiments. And then if I could recruit graduate students, I was like, great, let's teach you some things and then get them productive alongside with me. And so I just knew that like if I had like an end goal of being promoted with tenure, I needed a grant, I needed papers, and that's mostly what I focused on. And then I kind of like let the committee things kind of like be a secondary concern, because I knew like a lot of people told me, well, you're just going to get committees no matter what. Don't like try to find them. They'll kind of just land in your lap. So, and that's exactly what I think everybody that becomes a faculty member knows, that's some person's going to show up to your office like, hey, we have an open spot on X committee. We're going to need you to join that, or some fashion like that. So for me, my advice was focus on the research first. If that goes well, everything else will kind of fall in place. And so that's kind of like the advice I got. And that's basically the blueprint that I set when I started my lab. And I've kind of just been operating under that whole premise ever since.
Thank you. And that hits like on about 3 other questions I have for you all, but I see we're getting questions too. Yes, go, please.
Yes, so actually, I agree with Brandon. That's kind of what I did. I kind of started doing the lab, getting the experiments going, and I remember saying I have to hire a postdoc and I have to hire, but then I'll get students. But I'm like, I don't have time to wait for them to be good and do the experiments. So I just started doing it myself a lot, generating a lot of data, and get the iCook protocol and all that stuff. So, and I think it was good. And then he's right. Also, I agree with Lori and Brendan, like the committees, you don't have to look for them. They just fall upon yourself like, oh, you have to do this and that. And then my chair like, okay, you should be part of this committee and this committee. And so you don't even have to look, it just, you get suddenly receive emails and things like that. And if you do a good job, then more emails. So, so maybe I wish I was better at saying no. Now I'm good. But at that time I was like, why I say yes to all of that? So I will have sleep more and yeah, it would be better for work-life balance and kids and stuff like that. But anyway, that's my advice. I think there's a question also in the chat, I think, right?
Yeah, I was
Like
gonna
I saw.
finish off this. Yeah, I was gonna finish off this question and hit that really great question from Elizabeth in the chat. Absolutely.
Mhm.
James, do you have anything to add to finish off this question?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So, I think when it comes to mentorship, just kind of going along with what everybody else has been saying, one of the most important things I think is just to kind of realize how to operate outside the box. I think if we all look at our career plans, and you think when you're starting out 10 years down the road, you want to have your own lab and you want to have, coordinators, project managers working for you. What it's going to take to get there. Sometimes you got to do all the legwork yourself to start out so that you can get some of that initial money. So you need to realize just that it takes hard work to start, and to get to where you want to go. Yeah, that's about it.
Oh, thank you very much, all of you, for that. That was wonderful. In the chat or in the Q&A, we're being asked, what is something you wish you documented better throughout the process? Documentation, very important. We used to refer to it as you had to make the box because it was literally this big old box, might have been 2 boxes. Now it's all virtual. So there's something sad about not having that box anymore. But so what would you need to document better for that box? Thank you for that, Elizabeth.
Actually, I had a class that helped me with that how to document. It was a class for like tenure and promotion that I took maybe within a year of starting. So I was like, why am I doing that? I mean, it's promotion is in 6th year and I was it was early morning and it was a headache for the kids. But then I was like really like whining about it. But I realized that was the most helpful thing that I did because there was an older professor, let's put it that way, that was teaching it. But he's like, you need to create a me binder because to document. And then I'm like, this is a great idea. So then, because everything is electronic, you forget. And then you forget you got an award or you got a paper or you train that student. So I'm like, although everything is electronic, I started having a me binder. So I was just printing out. The minute I receive an email about something, I was printing it out. And then it became my me binder. It became 2 binders, but it was helpful because when I was filling out stuff for my online, I was like, oh, I forgot that. So that was really helpful, although everything is online, to print it. That was good advice that I had, the me binder. So.
And I love the me binder. We're all going to remember that now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brandon.
Yeah, I was just going to say to follow up, so at least for the P&T application that we do here, there's a lot of things you wouldn't expect, so there's a category for evidence of excellent teaching. And so really what that is evaluations from students. And so we have formal evaluations, but a lot of the students don't give their honest opinion until they do their graduation questionnaire. And that's not specified to any particular faculty member. So if I basically I had to go back for through years of emails. If I got positive reinforcement from a student, I had to then kind of capture that and then put it into my application. So that was one of those things where it's that took a long time to do that, after the fact. And if I was prepared, it would have been really easy. I would have got the email and just immediately, put it in my me binder. So I'll save that for my P&T for the next step. I'll start using a me binder.
I was going to say, everybody needs the me binder, right? From associate to full.
I think, just to add to that a little bit, when it comes to just electronic documentation, in my inbox, I just have the good folder, it's a very basic name. And it's just kind of when, just as Brandon was saying, if you ever got, a student or a trainee has ever kind of acknowledged the time that you've put in with them, or, something that you've been able to do for them that they've kept with them. Anytime any sort of accolades like that come through, just throw it in there. It's also good, when times are low, because we all go through low points. to go back to that folder, open it up and just flip through and be like, I have done some good things, you know, and I have had a meaningful positive impact on people's lives. So I find that that's helpful to turn to once you get that paper back and it gets as rejected can be, or you get that unscored, undiscussed grant application. So I think that's something that I find is kind of helpful for the documentation process as well. You know, also with like presentations and things like that, you know, if I get kind of asked to do something that's on the fly and I'm positive I'm going to forget to put it on my CV, I'll just drag that email into a separate folder as well. And so, you know, in my Outlook folders, just so that I can refer to it later, go back to it. You know, it's obviously we're all really, really busy, and it's easy to forget when we, you know, do these types of presentations or cover teaching a course, or, you know, and then when you get to that point and you're trying to rack back through your mind, oh, what did I do 2 years ago? You're going to miss stuff, obviously. You know, if you're as productive as we all are, you're going to miss stuff, which is a good thing because it shows that we're productive. But we should also make sure that we can get the acknowledgement that we deserve for it.
You all make sure this is in your me folder.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had to print out my 3 years ago. We were still using actual paper binders. So yeah, that part. I wish I had, more advice around that. But that's back to that first question, written myself a note about all this printing you're going to have to do. But so for me, I wish that there are so many like online trackers like Google Scholar and Poblans for peer review. Like I wish I had done those earlier. Like I was kind of scrambling at the last minute to get stuff set up in those so then I can pull out, right, the statistics that many of those online trackers provide. So, you know, like, I was on editorial boards, and so being able to like provide evidence that, in that service category where I was, then I was like, wow, okay, yeah, I said yes too many times. But, if I had, set up that online Publons account, from day one, it would have been a little bit easier versus trying to figure out, oh gosh, I reviewed for all of these places, and the Google Scholar metrics would have been, helpful a little bit sooner if I would have, set all of those things up. I think there were some other trackers that people were like, have you tried this or that? So having that like tracking system in place early, I think for people, I'm really detail oriented. I wish that I'd set something like that up sooner for each kind of area that is targeted in our promotion packets to be able to track those things. I did set up the email folder system like James talked about, which, was probably too late also, but is helpful now. Like I have all of these very useful tools set up to help. And it, I think the issue is when you're really busy, like having time to set something up versus like, once it's set up and it's really easy, it takes a minute to just add, to add that peer review or to save that email. I think it makes it a lot simpler versus reinventing the wheel when you're at the 10th hour and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do all these other things too.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing anything else in the Q&A. Let's go. I see lots of the people out there. I know several of you are first year, like first semester faculty even. So I know you got to have a lot of questions out there for this amazing panel. You certainly don't want the graybeard here asking all the questions because I don't know the relevant questions these days. But with that, I'm going to bounce off of something that was said a little earlier because I don't know if I did this explicitly, but I heard some mix of it in different places, and so I guess I wanted to hear about from the panel. When you were thinking about your trajectory, were you setting, kind of short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals? How did you set those? How did you come back and revisit those and think about those? And how did those feed into clearly what has been your success?
So I'll say that so earlier I mentioned that we had clear kind of like guidelines for what is going to be like, you know, specific for a promotion from assistant to associate professor. So, you know, for example, it's basically like we have to have like, you know, an average of X amount of publications per year. Like when we go up and for promotion and tenure, we have to have X amount of publications and a number of them have to be above a certain impact factor. And so really, like, honestly, I was basically just like, as soon as I got here, I just knew, okay, we got to do at least, you know, 2 papers a year. And so to guarantee that, let's just shoot for 4 papers a year. And I didn't get that 4, but like, it just had me focused on being productive and like in the mindset of like, you know, instead of just like trying to like get like a ton of data for like one big paper, it's like, let's just do specific components and like, you know, just make like really solid and good papers and just, you know, and send those out, you know. So that was like one of the things that kind of like made me focus on like really like short-term goals, but then also like an annual goal. Cause we have a meeting every year with our chair and he basically sits down and says, okay, what's happened this year? What did you do? And then like, you know, how does it kind of like filter into like what's going to be necessary for promotion and tenure? So like the first few years I was here, I didn't do like, I did 1 lecture a year and they did that just basically like, we don't know how good you're going to be and we're only going to give you 1 lecture. And also we're a medical school, so we don't teach a ton anyways. And so that just gave me a ton of time just to focus on the research side. But at the same time, we still have university commitments. So I knew that I had to serve on an overall university committee and a med schools committee before I went up for tenure. And so I just knew like, okay, around year 3, if I don't get something, then I'm going to try to find a committee. And just like we discussed before, I didn't have to search. And then the first year, basically 2 committees came asking, it's like, hey, can you please serve in this committee? And so that took care of that. But yeah, so a lot of short-term goals. And then still I had like the annual goal because I had to impress my chair. So that's kind of the thing that made me, you know, have like a guaranteed 1-year goal every single year.
Thank you. Know your guidelines. That'll be important. We'll come back to that in a minute. Other pieces for goal setting, things and strategies. Yeah, Lori.
Yeah. So early on, I was part of our colleges. We had a like early career scholarly enhancement program that was really helpful. And so as part of that program that supported early career faculty, we developed our scholarly mission statement, which helped me not only to be able to set goals for promotion and tenure, but to think about, okay, like keeping my efforts strategic and to have the greatest impact. I would always go back to that mission statement, like when I would get questions, hey, do you want to collaborate on this project? You know, I could focus, you know, so I had my goals, my short-term goals that all fed into my scholarly mission in addition to promotion goals, right? So to keep sane, that mission statement really helped me focus my efforts in, you know, in the areas that I wanted to have an impact, and also, you know, helped so that I wasn't spinning my wheels in too many areas. It really helped me to focus so that I could reach those short-term goal, right, research goals. My position is almost 100% research. So it was really focused on those short-term research goals, medium-term, long-term, and, you know, who do I want to be as a scholar? Like, helped really was that undergirding that helped kind of guide me through that whole process. And then, you know, my spreadsheet of goals related to who I wanted to be as a scholar was really helpful.
Thank you for that.
I think one thing I'd add too is that, you know, it's having the kind of the overarching long-term goals, and that's obviously could be, you know, even just like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you know, that time can vary. But knowing that, you know, there's not just one path to get to those goals. So you can have, you know, these long-term goals and then have these short-term goals that are going to get you there. but knowing that, there's sometimes a need to just kind of adjust, what your short-term goals are to still feed into the longer term ones. For example, with me specifically, I started off in my position here when I came in, as I mentioned earlier, right out of fellowship, and I was 85% clinical, and then, 10% research, 5% admin, something like that. But my long-term goal, looking 5 years out, was to be much more heavily involved in research, have my own program, and build it up. So it was hard for me to start off at the beginning when I'm, 85% clinical, really focused in. There was a lot of, obviously, outside of the work week, time spent trying to get my research program developed. But then as time goes on, I was able to build out and buy out more time, more of my clinical time, build more research time in, getting more effort dedicated to research. I was able to get there, but I constantly had to readjust kind of what I was thinking in terms of like, oh, I want this many publications. I want, this many grant submissions, this many conferences to attend, constantly just adjusting those short-term goals as I went along. So knowing that, the importance of kind of flexing it out as much as you can and, when needed.
And the only thing I would add, because that's basically all the points that were raised is what I did. Basically, like the short-term goals and the long-term goals, but also what I kind of did that I think helped is like I was also doing like Brandon, like say 4 papers or 5 papers a year, and I didn't reach that, but just to have like a higher like goal, then it helps you, it pushes you, right? And what was important too is the conferences, like James mentioned. It was important to go to conferences, because the first conferences I went when I just started my lab, they were like, oh, you're still with Dr. Holman. I'm like, no, I have my own lab. So I really did that a lot to make sure that when I submitted grants and things like that, that I had my own lab and things like that, right? Because, and then that was, I think, helpful to do that and organize also panels and symposium where I invited people. Like, so I organized some symposium and stuff, like more established people and things like that early on. That was helpful as a goal. So like as other goals that are different. And the hardest thing is sometimes you put goals and they don't get achieved. And then it's like kind of a little depressing, or you're like I'm more like critical of myself. So I try to tone that down over the years. So that was a good thing.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm so excited. There's a 1 on my Q&A here. Okay, from anonymous attendee. I like that. Could the panelists speak about priorities for writing time, manuscripts versus grants? As someone who does not have a pre-doc, postdoc trainee, I find that papers are slow to move forward because I have to lead all the writing. At the same time, I need to be writing grants, especially as research faculty. Very good question. Thank you, anonymous attendee.
So I guess I'll jump in. So the way it works for me, this works for me. This may not work for you. But my wife is a clinician. She does a lot of charting at home. And a lot of times, our dates are just, we sit at home, she's charting, I'm writing a paper or writing a grant. And so, but this is also like when I was a postdoc, my experiments were always I would do experiments all day. And I did a lot of my paper and grant writing at night. And that's just for me, because I really like writing papers. I don't like writing grants because there's always the fear of, oh my God, is this going to get discussed or not discussed? But papers, I think, are fun because I spend all my time doing experiments, and then I get to really think about what's the experiment mean, what's the data mean, what's this going to lead, like what's going to be the next step. So I really love that part. And I trained myself to like grant writing. I'm still working on it, but it's one of those things, like, since I love the paper writing, like writing a grant's kind of the same way, as far as like the significant scientific premise and kind of like what you want to do. So I try to dissociate myself, like, how are they going to destroy this grant and study section? And I focus upon like, what's really cool about this. And that dramatically changed my efficiency when it came to writing papers and grants, because they kind of flowed together. Like as I'm writing a paper, like if it's really good, it's like, all right, this could be a good grant. And now immediately take that idea and kind of translate it into a grant format. But honestly, the more grants you write, the easier it becomes, because some things don't really change, like your vertebrate animal sections, that's not going to change very much. your equipment, facilities, sections, that's not going to change that much. And then if you stay like within like, your same techniques, like some of like the technical premise sections stay the same. So really, like once you learn how to kind of dissociate and focus on what's the the new hypothesis of the grant, and like that's really what you need to focus on. And I find that that's useful because study section members will find, they'll find reasons to kind of like, let's just say, detract points. And if you make things more efficient for like, I would say like the other areas that are not unique to each grant, you can be more efficient in like potentially limiting the kind of negative points you're going to get for your grant submission. So that's the kind of the way I think about it. And I'll also say like, so even though if you don't have a pre-doc or a postdoc right now, from my experience, even when you get a pre-doc or a postdoc, that doesn't mean they're going to lead the paper writing or the grant writing, because they're still training. And so they may say, hey, I got this grant, and they send you the grant. And it's one of those things like, this is not going to work. And it's like, it's just a sea of red, like once you basically start the editing process, but that's good for them too. So sometimes it takes more effort and energy with the pre-doc and a postdoc, because it's not just they're writing the grant. You spend time basically not just correcting it, but trying to teach them like, how do you write a good grant? How do you write a good paper? And that takes time and effort. And then maybe in 3 years, they'll turn into like, an individual that can write a good grant or a good paper. But then, so it's a lot of time. But I would say like, if you struggle with writing papers and writing grants, which it's absolutely necessary for our careers, it's finding like, just finding mechanisms to basically, find the joy in doing those activities. And that's the only way I found to kind of help myself get through it.
So much great in there, Brandon. Thanks for that. And really good point about trainees and training. And it's a lot of work up front. It's got a lot of value and it's great and love it. But it is in the end there. And I also think I think when we talk about writing grants in my lab, we talk about, can we identify all of the reviewer chum, right? Anything that they're going to circle around and draw blood. So that's the way we think about it when we're working through it. So nice stuff. Others for this balanced grant writing and
So,
please.
yes. So basically for me too, it works better at night. I'm a night owl, so for me, writing at night has been always great. But when you're tired, you have kids and you work too much during the day, then you fall asleep when you get older. So basically, you're not as good to stay up all night. So, but basically, what I found too is I go somewhere else to write grants. So I'll go on the 4th floor, like close to I'm still in the building, but I'm not in my office, so less people can come and bother me. Or I go to a coffee shop for an hour or two. And sometimes it helps because it just it makes it enjoyable, right? And it makes it more fun. And I try also to put it in my calendar, like I need to write grants or do 2 figures for that manuscript. So, because I used to, what is hard as a PI, that's my personal comment, but when I was a postdoc, I could just like do a bunch of experiments and devote my time to finish a manuscript real fast. And when I was a PhD student, but when you have committee meetings, faculty things, the struggle to balance all of that, you can basically hide for 2 days, unfortunately. So basically what I found is putting time in my calendar to do it, and then also changing environments. So I'll go get a coffee and work a little bit on that. So then that way it makes it more enjoyable. That's what I found.
Definitely a pro tip to actually schedule time on your calendar for it and protect it. Others.
I think
We had
one thing-
simultaneous unmuting. That was awesome.
Sorry. One thing I would add, I think if your bread and butter is going to be the grant funding that you bring in, I think you have to get much more, efficient with kind of what you choose to publish and what you choose to write. You could be sitting on multiple data sets. The way I try to look at it is that, if I have a lot of data and I don't have as much help with graduate assistants or postdocs, I want to pick the data that I have access to that are really going to be preliminary data in whatever grant that I'm preparing, so that it kind of leads into the other. I think that that's one way. Of course, you have your kind of low-hanging fruit, those easier manuscripts. The data kind of speaks for itself, but use that as a way to kind of guide which data sets you should give priority to, which ones are going to help that grant that you really need to get, to be able to sustain your position. What data do you have that you can prioritize? And then which data can you put on the back burner, and just kind of wait on until you get through with that grant, and then you can turn your attention back to it. So I think it's all about time management as well, when you don't have the help to kind of get those manuscripts done.
All right, you.
A lot of great tips. I similarly, what James said, right? Publications lead to more grants. So be thinking strategically about what you're publishing. The blocking out time is great. Some additional things to think about, like early on, I built a network of peer collaborators. So those of us interested in similar topics would work right on secondary data analysis projects together, so that we each would take sections and could divide up the writing. Before we had a lab with students was really efficient and successful. We got a lot of publications that way. And similarly with grant writing, there's a team of us that share grant writing and now have been working together for a while. So we've had a lot of success that way. So we each take those particular sections that relate to our expertise. And, a lot of our projects have stemmed out of, great ideas that we've come up with collaboratively. But, I'm in a research center, and team science collaborative work is hailed, right, supported. And I know others, right, it's much more solitary and can be much more difficult to do something like that. But that's been really helpful for me, having those peer collaborators where we all kind of flip and share our roles on publications and grant submissions. I also found writing retreats, which takes you to a different place, right? And so you get out of your office and you have that dedicated time. So instead of vacations, a lot of years, I would schedule myself a writing retreat with those collaborators. So we would have a lot of dedicated time together, and found it to be really useful and helpful to move things forward that maybe we'd been spinning our wheels on or had been stuck on. Being able to even like a 3-day, mini retreat to someplace really fun that gets you off campus. So those are some additional recommendations.
Thanks for bringing up the faculty peer collaborators. I think that is important to develop a network, even if you're not writing together. We've already heard it helps you just think about other aspects like you were talking about with promotion and stuff. Just a shameless plug for the center, the Radar Center. If you're looking for secondary data to play with and publish on, we have some sitting around that peer groups could play with, and we would help facilitate that. So just a shameless plug for the center there. With that, I don't see any more Q&As, so I'm gonna ask a question that it took me by surprise when I was asked, because I did not realize it was a part of the process, and it may not be a part of the process everywhere, but it certainly is here at Nebraska, at least in psychology, but I think it might be in other departments as well, is that I was asked to help come up with the names of possible letter writers for promotion and tenure. And I was like, what? Huh? I wish I would have known that day one when I walked in, because I might have been facilitating and building those network and pieces that in a different way than I had been. I did not see that coming. So I guess I'd like to hear just about what I just said and hear your reactions, your thoughts, how you worked on that. Did it catch you by surprise? Did you have that? I'll stop there and go. Go,
I
Lori.
can jump in first. Yes, so I think I had known about that, because I remember thinking early on as a research faculty that my letter writers, are they going to know what I do as a research faculty. So I did take like really strategic efforts in attending lots of conferences, meeting with people, talking with people, getting out there so that, you know, people in my field knew who I was, what I did. I also searched out other research faculty to get just to talk with them, but also to think about, you know, them as potential letter writers for me. So I was pretty planful and trying to think about who might be those people who could write, and then trying to meet some of those people and connect with them pretty early on. I got involved in different leadership and professional organizations also as a way to, you know, think about who might be good letter writers for me, and, you know, this different kind of position. When, you know, when it got to that point to provide those names, I did have I had some good recommendations in the center, and I think this comes from our college, right? The chair, or in my case, the director, she could also offer some other names. So I think in our college, the faculty offer names of people, but then also the chair can add names. So, but I tried to have a good list prepared ahead of time.
Nice.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So we had specific rules that we had a specific number of internal and external letters. So basically people within our institution, people without, people outside of our institution, and that was clearly stated. And so I thought I was prepared, but what I wasn't prepared was like it wasn't really like clearly stated on our guidelines that like we had an arm's length rule, which is basically like, if you've like directly worked with someone, if they were directly your mentor, they're like off the list, but you can have one. And so I didn't know that. And so like the list I was preparing over the years were like, well, the people that know me best are the people that have worked with me. And so like I had like a 6-person list, and I happened to have already asked one of them because I ran into them at the conference, and basically I had to like eliminate the rest of that list because it's like I had one arm's length person. So yeah, that was one of the things where like I wish I understood it a little bit better, but I lucked out because as Rick knows, the nicotine field's pretty close knit. So it's like, even though I didn't work with certain people, or if I didn't like really know them that well, because it's like I don't want to say it's a small circle, but it's relatively small with neuroscience as a whole. And so I was amazed that I would talk to someone like, hey, I'm going up for tenure. I know you don't know me that well. And they're like, oh yeah, we can write a letter. I mean, so that was really fortuitous for me, because that was one of the things that I learned kind of relatively late in the game. So.
Other pieces to that? I will add to Brandon's, the nicotine field is small. I mean, the funny thing, Brandon, is that I chose nicotine coming out of my postdoc because I went to Society for Neuroscience meeting, and there were like 20 rows every session of cocaine grants, and there was like 2 poor little people studying nicotine over in the corner. And I'm like, well, let's see, I could compete with them or them. So I hear you. So that would be a piece of of advice I would give folks as they're developing their research program, is find your niche, and don't try to find a niche that you have to fight with the big dogs to start with.